Welcome to A Game of Ice and Fire, a video series devoted to A Song of Ice and Fire war game by Cool Mini or Not. We cover all aspects of the hobby with tactics and list build videos, painting tutorials of varying levels, and battle reports. In this video we're going to be going over painting the Kingsguard to more of like a book standard, I guess. We're going to be starting with Ares Oak Heart. I believe I said that right. Even though this isn't Ares, I had kind of had to do the models a couple different times because the stuff I'm doing is pretty delicate. You'll notice this video is pretty long and goes over that. So I think right there is like Preston Greenfield or something. So the two paints that I'm showing you are the ones that we're going to start painting the model with, or starting the base coat off with. And these are some scale 7.5 alchemy paints. I think it's citrine alchemy and white alchemy. These paints seem to be utilized more for highlighting certain metals. They're not the greatest at being the initial part of coverage. So I started with a gray base coat, and I know a lot of airbrusher, well, if you don't have an airbrush, this is going to not be super fun for you because this paint goes on way easier with an airbrush. You can see I'm being pretty delicate here. Usually when I utilize the airbrush to paint, I'm hammering on the colors. But for this one, you really have to make a lot of small passes in order to get these colors to actually develop. Otherwise, they're just going to pool to the recesses and not quite work the way you want them to. If you were to like maybe base this model in white and then be extremely delicate and careful with how you paint, you could get it. But it takes a little while to dry out, and now you can see finally with that citrine alchemy from scale 7.5, I'm starting to get this more yellowy white color. Now I believe here I'm still trying to utilize the citrine alchemy to try and make that a little bit more solid of a yellow color. So I want to try and stick closer to the way the books talk about these, or at least how the books say the Kingsguard look. On the card for the Kingsguard is some legit artwork. Like, I've always been a super huge fan of the more yellowy gold, the pale gold color, and I was super on board to just do these models in that paint scheme. But I opted to go for this because I thought it would look maybe a little bit better table-wise. And it's definitely unique. I don't think many people are doing this type of painting right now, at least the white enameled look. Now I'm coming in with the white alchemy, and this is another one where you can't hammer this stuff on. You've got to be pretty delicate with it, and it looks like I'm really covering the model with tons of this color, but I am alternating between throwing some paint on and just running the airbrush with just air coming out of it so I can dry it quicker. This is, I want to establish this super high white color, and then my shadows are going to be more with this bony yellow color, and I'm not quite sure if it is going to come off on the video as well as it is when you see the pictures at the end. But this alchemy color, they're still pretty metallic. They're more like they have a sheen to them. It's really hard to explain and hard to show off here, but they definitely look more metal. They don't have, like, I guess it's hard to explain. But now we're zooming in closer because I can't really airbrush super close to the camera, else I'll probably cover the camera. But maybe now you can kind of see that pearly enameled color. So there's going to be some fast forwarding going on throughout this, or some skipping ahead, but I am going to use that pale gold to kind of do all the rim, or all the detail work of the model. So I'm going in with I think it's black gold from scale 7.5, and this is a good color to start the base with. It's going to take a couple passes to get this perfect, because the problem with painting over white is kind of the same thing with painting over black. The tone, or the color underneath, is really, really strong and bright, so you have to take a couple passes to block that out, unless you're going to go and try and run your paint over thicker, which is just going to kind of look chunky and gross, so I would stay away from that. But right now we're just going over the shield, and I'm not trying to be super careful with how I do this. You might want to pay a little bit more attention to keep your lines tighter than I am, but I'm with the way the camera is situated, I'm still trying to get used to finding a way to work around this a camera at this angle, but at least now everyone can kind of see what I'm doing and how I'm painting here. Yep, this is one of the reasons why I'm skipping forward throughout some of this process, is that all of this is very tedious and delicate and not super fun. At one point, I had thought about using some mask or some latex masking on this model to where I could like mask out the white on it and then go through and airbrush it, but I ended up not doing that. So now we've got a lot of the trim done in that gold color, and we're going over Ares' hat. So I know that one of the things I've seen people say about Kingsguard models is that how am I ever going to tell them apart, because some of them are holding their sword the same way and some of them don't even have a face to look at. But once you paint them, you will remember their names, because the things that you paint are very annoying. Like this stupid helmet on Ares. You will remember that for the rest of your life. You'll be like, oh yeah, that's Ares Oakheart. He's got the stupid helmet I spent 2 hours trying to paint. So now that my rant's over, I'm going through and kind of highlighting the metals with, or the gold at least, with this is just regular gold from Vallejo Metal Color. These are the ones that come in that little bigger bottle, like maybe 3 ounces or something like, or 1 ounce bottle, 1 ounce bottle. And they've got like the black flip cap on them. Yeah, Vallejo Acrylic Metal Color Airbrush something. I'm trying to read it, but it's kind of coming out weird. And this is a really great color if you're trying to go for that pale gold. So we're leaving some of the black gold in the recesses and in some of the shadows. I really want to try and make this shine, because these Kingsguard models are supposed to be like, they're supposed to have like immaculate armor or whatever. It's supposed to just look very regal and kingly and pure and cool and stuff. So going for that nice shiny metal. I am hitting the scales a little bit here too, just to pick out some highlights on those. And I believe, if I was reading properly, that the breastplates on the Kingsguard models are supposed to be silver, but what I'm really trying to go for here is a more monotone thing, kind of on accident. So like, I'm kind of pulling a lot towards this yellow-white with what we're working with now. Don't mind the skip. That was me fast-forwarding, because this stuff takes forever, and once you've seen me do it, you can kind of get the gist of it yourself. So I'm just picking out some more edges on the shield after I've finished the rest of the model. And then we're going to move on to the last highlight, which is another alchemy color, and this is Peridot, or Peridot. I'm not sure quite how to say that. Alchemy from scale 7.5. This is more of like I don't know, it's hard to, it's like a pea colored yellow gold, but it's super duper bright. So this is what I think the alchemy colors are better off being used for, is either like a little bit of a tint for a shadow or a reflection in color, or as a super highlight. So the 3 colors that I used for this shield, the black gold, the straight gold from Vallejo, and then this Peridot alchemy, they're pretty close to where I don't feel like I need to mix them together to make the transition happen. Plus, on the table, when you're looking at these, the blends are kind of gonna happen themselves because the colors are so close. Once you get up to it, though, they look a little blocky. So again, fast forwarding through to get to more of me highlighting the rest of the model. This whole thing just takes a very long time if you're trying to be accurate with it. Plus, there were a bunch of cleanups. So now we finally get to the painting white part. Painting white is a painful process, or it can be at least, but I'm going to try and make it not so painful. So here's the 3 colors that I started off with were Somber Gray, Wolf Gray, and then just Dead White from Vallejo Game Color. What I'm doing right now is covering it in about 1:1 or 2:1, and now you can see I'm highlighting, but I'm not highlighting because I wanted to skip it and just be like, oh, this is dumb. But I'm highlighting to show you that I've made a horrible mistake in that those colors, when they go on, they're a lot lighter than when they dry. So you can see now I'm starting to see that the cloak is looking more gray than it is white. Like I want the shadows to be like a little bit on the bluish side, but I'm not really happy with how dark it is. So I am going to end up taking the color that I'm working with now and just kind of go over the entirety of the cloak all over again because I'm just not happy with the brightness of it. It's too blue. And I'm not trying to paint like this baby blue cloak, but I'm using these blue grays or these cool grays to kind of make the white look super clean and still have like a shadow to it to make it stand out a little. And that's why we've kind of pointed this model a lot more towards the yellows and golds for the white so that we can make this cloak really stand out and be super bright on the model because it's not that they contrast or anything, it's just when you use essentially one color on a model, this monochrome style of painting, if you just throw one color on there that's kind of similar but just has a little bit of a tint to it like this blue or blue-gray cloak, it really separates the model out a ton and makes it look super cool, at least in my opinion. And this way you can kind of get more of like, you convince people that the cloak is white even though it's not purely white. So we're going to get to a point where now I've covered the cloak with the brighter color, but we're going to go really fast in this next part because it is a long process. And what I'm doing here is, instead of like how in the black video I had blended the colors together, it kind of cheated the blending. What I'm doing here is I'm taking that original like 3 parts wolf gray and 1 part somber gray, and I'm just introducing more wolf gray into it and sliding a coat across the model on the parts where I will want a highlight to come through. It's like layering, but you're not thinning your paints down in order to make that transition. You're more so just gradually stepping the colors up a little brighter every time you put or every time you touch the model with the brush. So that way you're leaving less and less of a line. So if you start out with like a 2-inch line of a color, and then you're going to mix the white or the gray in to brighten it up a little, now you're going to paint like 1 3/4 inches of that. So you leave a little bit behind and the rest of the brighter color. And then eventually you're going to get to the point where like you've done this throughout the whole progression for each 1/4 inch or increment. It's arbitrary, the numbers I'm using, but you end up with a bit, it's kind of smooth. If you do it right, it's kind of a smoother transition. I mean, you can still tell that it wasn't blended or anything, but once you're playing with them and people aren't like holding them up to their face, it's not really easy to pick out when it's on the table in a unit. So at some point you'll get to a point where you want to step straight to wolf gray, which is where I think we're at right now, where it's just straight wolf gray. And you'll see there's a little bit of separation because we've kind of made that jump a little too quickly, and that's not a big deal. If you wanted to go through and do some wet blending or something like that to get these transitions on the cloak to work a little bit more smoothly for you, more power to you. But I've spent enough time painting the enameled white armor on this model that I kind of want to get the rest done pretty quick. So if I can kind of convince people or fool people into thinking that this cloak is really like has a real smooth, nice transition on it, then that's what I'm going to go for. So yeah, we're continuing to go around the model with the straight wolf gray, and then I think we might even be into where I've mixed in a little bit of white right now. But this is just a longer, everything I do on this model takes forever. It's a process. Like painting white it doesn't have to be difficult if you don't want it to be, but it's just a little bit on the time consuming side. And I think now we're coming in with pure white, and you can kind of see with the way there's the separation in the colors on the cloak that I've definitely stepped up a little too quickly. Like it's just not a very smooth transition. And once that dries out, it's going to look a lot more like chalky and, I don't know, not chalky so much, but you can tell that like I just kind of swept uh, white over it instead of really like taking my time on it. But I am the kind of painter that if I've had something on my table for too long, I start to get a little bit antsy with painting it to try and get it off. And with this one, I'm only really painting one of these at a time because I'm not a primary Lannister player, but I'll play them eventually. But you know, I'm kind of paying more attention to my free folk. So when you've got one Kingsguard sitting in front of you for a week, and you've got, you know, 30 or 40 free folk trappers staring at you from your display case, it can get you can get a little anxious trying to get things done. So I did step this process up a little quicker, but it really is just, if you take your time and build the colors up slowly, and you don't have to, again, you don't have to do anything like thin them down to a crazy level and make sure you're pulling the paint to where the highest point on the cloak is. You can just do this kind of fake layering and get the results you want, and it's not gonna take a real long time, and it's gonna look good enough to just say, yeah, it's a white cloak, it looks cool, and it's got some visual interest to it. So we're going to transition into what this has looked like finished. So now this is 100% pure white. It took a long time for me to get here, but you can kind of see it. Like I said, at the end of this video, you're going to see more stills that kind of, and of course throughout the video, you'll see the white cloak a little bit closer. But now what I've got is the problem of the white doesn't have any, it's not showing off any of the cool details or recesses. So what I'm going to do is take the Seraphim Sepia wash from GW and mix it in with just a very small amount of Flow Aid from Liquitex. You don't need much of this stuff to go very far. And the reason why we're doing this is, like, washes naturally pool to the crevices and creases in a model, but when I don't want to leave any residue behind of that wash to kind of like make the armor look dirty or grody or something like that. So what what the Flow Aid does is it lets me take a small amount of wash, and as soon as I touch that crease, it's going to flow right into it, almost like an oil wash if you've ever used those. So you can kind of see on the knees or shins here, you couldn't see that little spiky part before, but now with this wash, this very like pinpointed, calculated wash, I'm able to call out some of those, call some attention to some of those details. And we got like the ribs on the breastplate here that we can go over, and that'll make sure that we build up a lot of contrast between each one of those levels, so we can show off like the coolness of the breastplate here. Now, on my model, I didn't end up doing it as a spoiler, but you could go back and use like the white alchemy to kind of pull out some highlights if you are if the wash gets a little bit too polluting. So like on the breastplate and on part of that shin, the wash kind of got a little bit away from me, so it ended up drying on and making that one piece look really like brown. So with that Seraphim, another part about the brown is that the Seraphim Sepia is really good for this, since we use that citrine alchemy, that really yellowish metal, to start the base coat for it. It allows us to make the shadows look really natural against that yellow metal. So now Ares does have a bit of his head poking out from some of that helmet, so I'm sticking with my tried and true skin tones of like 1-to-1 Tindalos Red and Harvester Flesh. We're just going to use a really, I think I've been using just a 0 or a 1 brush. It's probably a 0 brush the whole time for this model, but we're just using that to paint the initial part of the face with that 1-to-1 mix of Tindalos Red and Harvester Flesh. And once it's dry, we're going to come back in and hit it with just pure Harvester Flesh. We're just going to try and call the features out here to let people know that they're there. There's not much of his face showing to where you can really get an idea of what this character looks like. So having a lot of that dark Tindalos Red is going to be nice in the eyes because we won't have to go in there and really do them if you don't want to. And now what I'm doing to get the final highlight on the model is just Tindalos, or not Tindalos red, Harvester flesh mixed up with a little bit of Resurrectionist flesh. And that's going to get like the tip of the nose, part of the lips, because you could make the lips like pinkish, but for a model that only has so much of his head poking out, I'm not really super interested in it. And from what I can tell, I could be wrong, but I don't think this model has a mustache, so I'm skipping it. So now we're doing yellow. Yellow's another pain in the butt color for some people to paint, but Averland Sunset from GW's their baseline is perfect for trying to start your yellow. So I don't want to start right at that yellow color, so I'm going to mix in the leather brown from Vallejo Game Color, just make it a little bit more like tan and deep so my shadows can look really neat when I start to build that yellow up to that Uriel yellow. So yellow is a little bit easier to paint on white, so we're kind of cheating the system a little bit here with that. But I am going to take a couple passes with this one just because it still does get a little blotchy, I think. This particular bottle of Averland Sunset came from a friend who had stopped painting and playing a while ago, so it was a little chunky, so I had to kind of remix it so it's just kind of broken up a little bit. So we're also going to utilize this time to hit the oak leaves on Aries' back. I'm pretty sure it's Aries. I'm probably gonna, somebody will call me out for saying that wrong, but the oak leaves on his back are really funky. Well, not all of them. The two that are higher on the cloak are pretty good, but then that middle one almost seems like it gets warped in the fold. So it's almost like when whoever did the sculpting on it, maybe when they put the oak leaf on the cloak first, and then like when they pulled in a blend or something, it just distorted the leaf enough to where it just looks kind of screwbally. But it's since it's in a fold, it's not something we're too worried about. And all I'm doing here is using the tip of the brush with my paint a little bit on the thick side. Whenever you're doing these embossed images, I like to have my paint a little bit thicker so I can control it better. And it'll help you out when it comes to trying to paint some of those things on banners or for the Kingsguard, their cloaks. So now we're going in with plain old Averland Sunset. You can see it looks pretty bright against the leather brown that we've got. And that's kind of the trick to painting yellow, is if you want like banana yellow, it's a little bit harder to do. So you want to try and get a darker yellow or brown underneath it so that you can create a lot of contrast between the shadow color or your shade color or whatever. And then when you build up to the straight yellow and then yellow mixed with white, or however you want to do it, which you could, when I say that, I mean you can mix white with yellow to get a highlight color, or you can mix yellow with like a bone ivory color to get the highlight, and they're both fine, and there's no one right way to do it. It's just really what you're going for. So with these, I'm just going for like a yellowish goldy cloth. I'm not trying to do any like weird non-metal simulation, but if you want to do that, that's fine. I also wanted to do the little tassel on their head in yellow because I just figured like get that Baratheon color going on there. I could have done it in red, but I feel like it would have been just a little too, maybe it would have stood out a little too much. And if it was white, it wouldn't look like, I think it wouldn't look interesting enough. Like I needed some colors on this to actually make it stand out. So I think at this point I'm adding in a little bit of Uriel yellow to Averland Sunset. And now I'm doing some cross hatches, or not cross hatches, they're just like small lines on the oak leaves. And I'm not trying to simulate veins or anything because I'm not being super accurate with them. I'm just trying to get some kind of texture created on those. And it's not like you'll be able to see it like on the table at all. It's just that I'm trying to have some fun with the texture on the cloth, but not too much. You know, there's a lot of really interesting painters that do some really cool stuff with cloth, but I am fairly basic in most of the things that I do, so I don't try to go too nutty. I think I hit the model with a little too much yellow, and it kind of pooled off of the leaf a little bit. So if you just take your brush and soak it in water, or just get a decent amount of water on it, and then swirl it around there, that should mix the paint into the water that's on the model. And then you just dry that brush off. And you can see me trying to chase it now, but you dry the brush out, and then the brush can absorb that water again. So if you make a mistake, that's kind of like how you use your paintbrush as an eraser. So I think this is. It looks like it's just Uriel yellow straight, but this could be my Uriel yellow plus white mix. I guess we'll see in a little bit if that's what I actually did here. No, I think that was the yellow plus white. Oh, but we're mixing. Nope, no, here's the yellow plus white. Sorry about that. I think this model took a very long time to finish, so a lot of the techniques are kind of blending together in the color schemes and stuff or the paints that I used. But this is the final highlight. Now you can see that yellow, at least on the top, is really standing out. And that's because we started with such a deep brown color to help bring some attention to it. And now with that yellow white on the leaves, I mixed in just a little bit more white on here because since I've been putting so many cross lines or lines on here, you're not really able to see it, so I need something that's really stark and massive in terms of the difference between the color I just used and the color I'm using now. So now I'm reaching for the leather brown from Vallejo and the P3 Menoth base, or Menoth white base. And the Kingsguard on their arms have these little like parts of cloth sticking out. So I'm going to keep sticking with the whitish brown type theme that I got going on with these guys. And I'm just going to cover those arms in a mix of the leather brown plus the Menoth white base. And I think here I've gone in with just Menoth base, and I got a little bit overly excited about finishing the model, so I kind of have to mix in a little bit of white because the paint underneath is still pretty wet. So I'm kind of doing this like pseudo wet blending stuff that I had done in the black video, where I'm putting the color down while the other one's still wet and just trying to like massage it in so that it kind of blends together a little bit. I don't think that it's a technique that anyone uses to great effect. It's just something to do when you want to try and get something done fast. So now I'm coming in with I didn't like that it wasn't quite bright enough for me. So, and I did want it to stand out a little bit or just be different from the armor. So now I'm mixed with just dead white from Vallejo and the P3 Menoth base, and just highlighting the elbows and some of the folds so that it just looks different or bright, I guess. So I think we're at the point where the sword needs to be done. So I wanted this sword to be a little bit more like super bright. So you can see that the black that I'm putting on is actually super duper thin and isn't really doing much of a good job trying to like really block out the white color in there. Like you can still see a lot of the white showing through, and that it looks like actually some of the black is starting to pool up because it's so thin. So I let that dry for a while, and now I'm just going to cover the entire sword with heavy metal from scale 7.5. And this is just going to give us a base to build up from with some of those other metals that I'm going to be using. And then the little, I'm not sure what it's called, but the crease that's in the middle of the sword, that is going to stay heavy metal. So we're really trying to do we're trying to do a pretty light silver sword here. And now I missed my entrance, but now I'm highlighting in heavy metal, and we're just trying to be really careful about not hitting the middle of that sword. And I do apologize if I start painting off camera. I am really trying to get used to painting a little bit closer so it's not You can actually see what's going on. So this is another Vallejo metal color from the airbrush line. It's just silver, so I just did a quick highlight there, and now we're finally able to move on to my junky department store paints so that I can do the base. So at first I grabbed my big ratty brush, and I realized real quick that if I get sloppy with this like I do on most of my bases, I'm going to start getting that white dirty, and I want to make sure that it stays nice and crisp and clean. So I grab one of my larger brushes that's kind of more pinpointed. It's got a better brush tip on it, and I start going in there and jamming the color into the Vallejo earth texture that I had put on earlier on that model. And the base itself, I'm gonna end up rimming it in black once it's all said and done, but I'm gonna just try and put a little bit of the base coat for that dirt on the rim of the base, so I can make the transition from that pearly white to black a little easier. So now we've dried up, and we're going to start dry brushing with Beastie Brown from Vallejo. And this is like, I'm not doing a straight dry brush on this. It's not, I didn't try to rub all of the paint off the brush on this one. It's still a little bit wet because I do not want the earth around him to be super dark. Kind of want it to look like a little bit more healthy. So I decided to not completely wipe the brush off like I am going to with the khaki that I'm going to use next for the highlight on there, because with the khaki I just really do want to catch the edges of the base. I'm not wanting to really completely alter the color of the dirt around him. So we're just going around the rim of the base because I do want to keep some of the shadows. You can kind of simulate a shadow by not dry brushing that super light color underneath their legs. It's not a big deal, but it's just something to have there. And still, I just cannot shake the feeling of seeing a rim or seeing a round lip for a base and not painting it black. I've always thought that the rims or bases on your models can kind of serve as a frame for them. So I've always painted them black, and you don't have to do this at all. You can leave it the color of the basing that you're doing or whatever. This is just something that I do that really doesn't matter. So I spend 5-10 minutes doing this. And then I know, I'm not sure if you noticed, but I had painted the belt black originally, and I cut it out of here because at first I thought, yeah, I'll paint the belt black. It'll break the model up a little bit. But I don't want to break the model up a little bit. I still want to keep it in this like brown, yellow, white, gold like realm of those colors. So I end up going back over it with charred brown from Vallejo Game Color, and now I'm highlighting with a mix of Beastie Brown and charred brown just to I don't know, there was something about the black belt that just wasn't working for me. It just stood out too much. So if you notice the belt being painted or having been painted, kudos to you, but I just was not feeling it. So we went with and I also, on the first belt loops, I had maybe over highlighted. So now I'm coming in with a mix between black and charred brown to try and like create some separation between the loops. And then I think this model's pretty much said and done with. So now we've got some stills because it can't hold them right. You can kind of see here that cloak is looking pretty nice. You can see the lines and everything. But this one, I wanted to show kind of the transition on the shield because the video doesn't show it very well. So this is kind of what happens with the armors. It gets that cool ivory to white look to it. So if this is something you enjoyed, definitely experiment with those colors. I think there's a couple other companies that make more pearly type white colors that might paint on a little bit easier. But if you have an airbrush or you want to try and work through the scale 7.5 build up process, this paint is super awesome for trying to get that white enamel look for the Kingsguard. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking with me through to the end. These Kingsguard models have a lot going on, so it took a bit longer to get them done. If you want to keep up with the content that I post, Big Top Gaming has a Facebook page, which I have a link for the description, or link in the description, along with the Game of Ice and Fire podcast that's fairly young right now. If you have any questions at all, feel free to post them in the comments below, and do remember to like and subscribe. And if you want to know when I post a video, because I might be a little bit slow on updating Facebook versus updating YouTube, you can hit the notification button, and that'll just send you an email whenever I post something new. Otherwise, I hope this helps you get your Kingsguard painted with that sweet white enamel look.